So as Dietrich mentioned, my name is Vel Genov, and I'm the product manager for the Adobe PDF library product line. So the Adobe PDF library is actually the library that's behind Adobe Acrobat and other Adobe products, and we have some enhancements to it, and we provide it to enterprises. Now, translating PDF features to your user benefits, what's that about? Well, I started off actually, as an engineer, I wasn't always a product manager. Actually, I started off as an IT person back in the late 90s, but that's not covered in this presentation. So as an engineer, I would usually think of a really cool feature, then I would go off and implement it, and I'd be perfectly happy with that. Well, it comes out that businesses don't really make decisions based on the cool feature that I came up with. They would really rather see how that would hit their bottom line, or how would that reduce some risk for them, so on and so forth. So that's why I've been trying to translate certain features of the PDF format to actual benefits for businesses. And this is how we try to get higher adoption for PDF and get more businesses on board with this great standard. Now, PDF has been around since the early 90s, and Leonard mentioned this morning that PDF has been around for 25 years, which is pretty great. And PDF is a very widely adopted format. So there are about 2.5 trillion PDF documents created every year. That's a lot of documents. And yet I still get on calls with prospects, and they still ask me if they should be using PDF or JPEG or Word or some other standard for their workflow. So they're clearly unfamiliar with some of the benefits of PDF, and that's clearly something that we should do a better job of communicating with people. Now let's go and talk about one of the first major benefits of PDF. Now I know a lot of you in this audience are actually aware that PDF is an ISO standard. I'm just going to go over it for the sake of people that don't really know how that benefits end users. So PDF is an ISO standard. That pretty much guarantees the longevity of the standard. It's been around, it's going to be around. There's a body of people that are actually actively working to keep the standard up to date. That's a pretty great thing. And it's also an open PDF standard. That means that vendors implementing PDF will try to keep it consistent. There is a standard, it's defined, and people will try to actually follow it. How does that really benefit businesses? Well, that makes PDF pretty predictable. As I mentioned, it's been around, and it's going to be around. That really reduces risk for businesses. So businesses can trust PDF as a standard. They can trust that it's going to be available for their usage. It's not implemented by a single vendor. It's implemented by multiple vendors. So if they don't like the way a certain vendor is implementing their PDF, they can go to a different vendor. And that's a really great thing for businesses. That's really something that drives people to them. So PDF is an open standard, and anyone can implement it. That creates competition. As I mentioned, competition is a great thing for businesses using the PDF standard. Again, if they're not happy with what's out there, they can go to somebody else. And that really drives the quality of the PDF files produced and the PDF files processed. It drives that quality up. And it also creates high document integrity. Now let's move on to the next PDF feature that I've picked here for our list. That's document authenticity. One of the core brand promises of PDF is that it's designed to be like digital paper. So pretty much the author designs the document, and then the document is going to be reproduced exactly the way the author intended it to be. We know that in reality, this is not 100% the case, but let's just say that most of the times PDF documents are reproduced exactly the way authors intended them to be reproduced. Now again, that's based on the tools that are used out there, and if some user is not happy with the tools that don't reproduce the documents properly, they can move on to other tools because there's a lot of PDF tools available out there. Now, terms like digital paper should be used pretty sparingly with users because that makes users think that PDF documents are just dots on paper, just like images. While that's the core brand promise of PDF, PDF is actually much more. PDF can contain searchable text, PDF can contain fonts, PDF can contain images, PDF can contain other PDFs. So that makes it actually a pretty versatile and a pretty great format. Let's take a look at one usage of the document format that really benefits from its authenticity. Let's take a look at contracts. Contracts benefit from PDF very well just because PDF is reproduced exactly the same way across platforms, across devices, so on and so forth. Then for contracts, that's pretty important. People want their contracts to be viewed the same by everybody signing a particular contract because we don't want anyone to get sued. And that's why PDF is so great. As I mentioned, PDF can also contain searchable text. It's another great feature for working with contracts. And another thing is that PDFs can contain signatures, and contracts need to be signed, so that's a really neat thing that works very well with PDF contracts. Now let's take a look at signatures here. How were documents signed in the past, before PDF existed, before other electronic ways of signing documents existed? Well, documents have to be walked from place to place. Imagine you work in an office. That office spans multiple floors, and you need one document to be signed by multiple people. You would give the document to your mail person, then they would send it off to the other floor, and they would get it signed. This becomes more difficult if you have two remote offices in two parts of the city where you actually have to use bike messengers. Now, I'm currently in Chicago, and I've been in Chicago for quite a while. And when I started working for Datalogics, we had a lot more bike messengers than we have right now. Bike messengers, they go on their bikes, they pick up a document from somewhere, they go on their bikes with their really cool tattoos and everything, and they write to another office, and then they hand the document off to somebody else, they sign it, and the bike messenger picks it up, and it drags it over to a third place, or it drags it back to the first person. Either way, that takes time. And with businesses, time is money, so businesses are not doing so well with that manual procedure of signing documents. And here comes PDF to the rescue. Now, PDF allows for multiple types of signatures. You can use different signatures depending on the complexity of the signature you require, the security of the signature that you require, and also the regulations in your country or state, as in the US, certain regulations are state-based. So the simplest type of signature that you can use is a wetting signature. A wetting signature is simply a picture of a signature. That's perfectly valid in some states in the US. So you can take a picture of somebody's signature and you can just insert it in a document. That's secure enough. That works for some people, and they're happy with it, so that's great. And it's allowed by PDF. Other types of signatures that they're a little more complex are digital signatures. Those signatures allow for some higher levels of security, and they also allow you to see actually who has signed a particular document when, and so on and so forth. So we have two really major types of digital signatures. That's self-signed signatures, and that's signatures issued by a particular signing authority. Self-issued signatures, they're pretty simple. You can create one on your own computer, and you can sign a document with that. Now, if you don't sign a lot of documents, if you just need to do it every once in a blue moon, that's perfectly fine. Again, it's perfectly legal, and it's going to give you a higher level of security. Now, say you work for a big organization. You need to sign lots of documents on a regular basis. Then you can actually go and get a signature from a signature authority that has some cost associated with it, but it also has some better level of security. People looking at documents signed by you are going to be able to tell who exactly signed them, and also that signing authority is going to be able to pretty much vouch for you and say that this was really you signing that document. So that really brings some extra security in there. Now, some of the benefits of those digital signatures. Digital signatures can be automatically verified. As I mentioned, if you get a signature from a certificate authority, you can actually click on that signature and it's going to tell you exactly who signed that document. That's a really cool feature. You don't need experts to verify the authenticity of signatures anymore. Back in the paper days, you needed somebody that's an expert in the field to come and look at the signature with a little magnifying glass and verify that's really you signing that document. Well, you don't need to do that anymore, just because of PDF. Digital signatures with PDF allow you to see if a document has changed or not since it has been signed. That increases the level of security with PDF documents and signatures. That's a really good feature, and that's something that reduces risk for businesses. So businesses using PDF instead of regular paper documents are going to be able to say this document hasn't changed since it was signed. It's a really big feature right there. And the security of the signature is based on well-accepted cryptography protocols, at least for the self-issued and certificate authority-issued signatures. That doesn't really apply to the wet ink signatures, but you know we have some trade-offs in the different types of signatures used. And as I mentioned, there is a flexibility in the minimum level of trust required. So you can get the most basic signature, you can get the most complicated signature, and it's really based on your requirements. PDF allows you that flexibility, which is a great thing. So, where the digital signature is used, and how in this case did they change the real estate industry? So, I got a house about 3 years ago, and it was a pretty complicated process. In the US, the signings were done in person. So we had to rent a room where at a very specified time everybody had to go and meet to sign all the paperwork. So this was me, my wife, our attorney, our seller's attorney, the people managing the office, and remotely telecommuting was the banker actually issuing the loan. So all these people had to gather in one room, and then we had to just pray that the banker actually gets their job done on time for the time that we have reserved this room for, because there are other people waiting behind us. So there's cost associated with that. There's also time wasted associated with that, and that's kind of a hassle. It's a very stressful day. Now, the way a lot of property closings are done in the U.S. these days, and again, that's based on some states, other states don't allow that, is they allow property closings to be done electronically. So nobody has to meet in person anymore. You can just get the documents, sign them online, send them back, and it's done. It's a pretty simple process. It doesn't really require people to sit around and wait for each other. It doesn't require renting space. It doesn't require all of that hassle. So that's a really great thing. It's saving people money as we speak, and it's actually streamlining the process much more than that was done before. So a document goes through most of its life cycle. It's created, it's viewed by multiple people, it's shared, whatever, it's signed. Then another thing that we might want to do with it is archive it. Now, Dietrich spoke about archiving today, and it's a pretty big topic in this community. So I'm just going to go briefly over the history of archiving and why PDF archives have certain benefits over other types of archiving. So let's take a look at how documents were archived in the past. And there are paper archives, and of course paper archives have been around for thousands of years. I'm sorry, hundreds of years since paper was around. And also as of recently, there have been microfilm archives. I'm not old enough to remember those, but they are around. And those, of course, have some downsides. Now, first of all, there's space requirements when it comes to paper archives. Paper has to be stored, and that's pretty difficult. You have to have special rooms that hold the paper. Those rooms have to be climate controlled. They have to be light controlled. The paper has to be stored in a specific way. And those buildings are pretty much built with the sole purpose of storing paper. Now, I had a friend that worked for a pharmaceutical company, and they made the mistake of having their archive on a second floor, and the room started buckling at some point, so they have to reinforce it from the bottom. It's kind of a big problem to have, especially with documents that need to be stored for, I believe, 7 years at a time for his particular industry. Those documents were not going to last 7 years, and the people actually managing those documents had to come up with a quick solution that was going to cost them time and money to actually make sure those documents last their lifespan. So that makes paper archives pretty unreliable. They're easily affected by the elements. You know, paper is pretty brittle. Fires and floods can affect paper archives. And microfilm is even more fragile than paper. You know, microfilm has even stricter requirements for storing than actual paper. And microfilm has, of course, the advantage of taking less space, but it requires specified equipment to view. And once microfilm becomes brittle, it's really difficult to handle. There are government organizations, at least in the U.S., that have a lot of microfilm archives. A lot of those are damaged, and that's knowledge that's pretty much lost forever just because that medium was not really all that suitable for long-term storage. Now, paper archiving is also bad for the environment, of course. We're trying to go paperless. We're trying to kill less trees. And by creating paper archives, that's not really the way to do that. Another thing about paper archiving is it's very error-prone. Imagine having a big archive with big boxes of paper, and you have to have somebody manually go and retrieve a document for you, and then they try to go and insert the document in the same spot, and imagine that's your birth certificate, and they misplace it. That's usually a problem, and paper is pretty error-prone. Those archives are also difficult to search. Searching is usually done in person because you have to go and move the paper manually, and that's another problem for those businesses. And there's of course no access control other than the person that you sign the document in and out of. And that's really your only access control there, and manual access control is pretty error-prone. Now, TIFF was invented in 1986, and it was invented as an answer to paper archives, to paper and microfilm archives, really. As such, TIFF was created for black and white documents only originally, and color was kind of added after the fact to TIFF since it did have some requirements where it had to handle color. But TIFF has had no official release since 1992. A lot of the TIFFs that we see right now are based on derivatives of the original standard, and some of those are really not compatible with each other. So storing things as TIFF nowadays really kind of presents more problems than it resolves, because we have no guarantee that the standard is going to be around in the future, and we have no guarantee of which iteration of the standard is going to be around in the future. So we might not be able to open those documents in the future, which is a pretty big problem for archives. Now, I recently landed on a forum thread when somebody was asking about the fact where they should use TIFF or PDF for their archives. They had been using TIFF for a while. It's been working out inside of their organization, but it might not work out in the future. So they were really asking about the benefits of PDF over TIFF. So that leads me to believe that the benefits of PDF over such standards are not really well understood. Let's take a look at some other forms of electronic archiving used today. Now, some of these might seem pretty odd to you, but they're actually used, I know firsthand. For example, where is HTML used for archiving? Well, in the medical industry, if you communicate something with an end user, then you have to preserve that information in the same format it was originally created in, which is usually HTML, since that's what goes in an email most of the times. So you actually have to go and archive that HTML and make sure that it's going to be available multiple years into the future, and that you're going to be able to view it exactly the same as you can today multiple years in the future, which, as we all know, is pretty impossible with HTML, since standard changes, browsers change, documents viewed differently across browsers, so on and so forth. So it's not very reliable, not very archival-ready format. Another thing with Word, people use Word for archiving, unfortunately. Word is solely owned by Microsoft. It's not an actual standard. It's not an open ISO standard as PDF is. And Microsoft might decide to not have Word in the future. We have no guarantees that Word is actually going to be around, just like WordPerfect, which I have there. Another format people use for archiving, actually it's a collection of formats. There are various image formats, so people use various image formats for archiving, and they have various levels of suitability for archiving. Image formats are pretty much dots on a digital piece of paper, and as such, they're not searchable, which is a pretty big problem for archives. So again, here comes PDF to save the day. PDF actually has a subsection called PDF-A that was created in 2005, and that's there specifically for archiving. PDF-A is an open ISO standard, again, just like PDF, although a separate standard. And PDF-A is created with the archiving community in mind. Now, PDF-A was actually modeled based on some of the experience that people got with the TIFF file format and building on top of it. And that's why it's such a good standard for archiving. Now, some of the advantages of PDF-A. It's an ISO standard, so it pretty much guarantees that the format will be around in the future. It won't disappear, and it won't be something that's not maintained. And as you can see, PDF-A has had multiple iterations so far. We're up to PDF-A 3 right now, which was released a few years ago. So that pretty much tells you that the standard is there, and it's actually going to be there since it's an ISO standard, unlike TIFF, which hasn't been updated since 1992. So now that itself lends it pretty well to actual archiving. PDF in its core is a searchable file format. We have to be careful how we create our PDFs so they can actually be searchable. So by definition, not all PDFs are searchable. For example, if you have a PDF that's just made out of an image, that's obviously not going to be searchable. But as a format, it allows you to create a searchable PDF if you create it properly. As an electronic format, it can be designed for remote access, so that's solving a big problem for the archiving community. Unlike regular paper archives and microfilms, which can't be accessed remotely. It also is unaffected by the elements. If your server room is on fire, you should have a backup of that server room. If you don't have a backup, then that's not properly set server room. But it's pretty easy to actually create backups of electronic documents, and you can have multiple backups of one electronic document, which is always great. So information never gets lost this way, and this is something that's really big for the archiving community. You don't want to have an archive that's lost. That's just a lot of knowledge down the drain. Plus, you can also get sued since you're required to keep some archives for multiple years. This also has low space requirements. You don't have to have huge air-conditioned rooms. You just need to have smaller air-conditioned data centers, which is a marginal space saving, but it's a pretty big one. Also, electronic PDFs don't take as much space as actual paper, so that's another space saving there. So let's put archiving aside and talk about document reusability. So we've had a document that's gone through its whole life cycle. It's been viewed by multiple people. It's been signed. It's been signed. It's served its purpose. It's been archived, and now we actually want to pull it out of the archive and reuse that document for a different purpose. Whether that was the purpose it was originally meant for, or we want to recreate something brand new out of it, is something that I'll cover in a little. Now, but then let's take a look at how other documents lend themselves to reusability. Let's take a look at Word, for example. One great feature about Word is that text can be edited, images can be edited, pretty much the whole document can be edited, which is really great. The big problem is that once you take a sentence out of a Word document on page 1, that's really going to shift all of your pages a little bit, and that's pretty unfortunate. That's because pages in Word aren't independent, and it's really good for what it is, but it doesn't really help us too much in this case. So let's take a look at how PDFs can be reused in this exact example. So PDFs are a realistic representation of a real document, and pages in each PDF are actually independent. So what you can do is you can take pages from multiple PDF documents and create a new document, and that's actually pretty easy. You don't really have to do too much editing to do that. Imagine you're working with a company that's trying to repurpose a bunch of content to create new marketing material, for example. They can just take existing spec sheets. They can convert some other existing documentation to PDF. They can take different pages out of that. They can slap a new front page to it, and they have a new piece of marketing material. So that's really great. It actually saves companies both time and money because they don't have to have somebody going and painstakingly having to recreate all of this content. Another great thing about PDFs is they can be optimized. Say you have a PDF that's a print-ready PDF that you're using for some purposes, and you would want to make that print-ready PDF a little easier to actually distribute online. Well, print-ready PDFs might have large images. Those images might be in a specific color profile, and you really don't want to distribute that content to actual end users to view it on their devices. Well, you can actually go through a process, downsample the images, do some color conversions, and that document's actually going to be perfectly usable for your end users. So that's another pretty great feature that's often overlooked with PDF is its content reusability. So in summary, I'd like to go over a couple of the big points that we touched on today, and that's the authenticity of the PDF documents, their security, and their archivability. Of course, there are other benefits that you users and businesses in general are going to have out of PDF documents. And I'd really encourage you to go and look for those benefits and to actually communicate those benefits to the business community that's maybe on the fence between adopting another file format for a certain procedure or using PDF. I'd really encourage you to actually learn those benefits and communicate them so people can make better and more educated choices. So with that, I'd like to close this talk. Thank you very much for attending. Do you have any questions?
So how do you envision that the presented will change with next-gen PDF, especially regarding archival and the lack of backward compatibility? I see some risks there.
That's really something that's more appropriate for Dietrich, I believe.
The question is whether we see any problems with regards to reusability of PDF files?
With backwards compatibility and archival workflows? Because if next-gen readers are not going to support the 13 elements, structural elements that will be removed in the PDF spec, then what will the impact be on PDF A1, A2 files that were created in 1.7 environments?
Okay, you mean new viewers. So I'm not sure whether I get it right, but it is expected, of course, to have a PDF A1 viewer in the future. So that is an archive standard, and it is specified in the standard how a viewer has to work. So there is no reason to believe that, I don't know, in 20 years from now, there only exists viewers that can deal with what is then the next generation after the next generation PDF file, but not with what we currently have in the archive. Does this answer your question? So at least that is what we expect. Of course, nobody really can have a look into the future. Maybe at some time the whole community does not work anymore, so I cannot see any reason for believing that. But of course, there is no way to know this. There is just a probability, a very reasoned probability that a PFA viewer will exist for PFA files in the future. And then, if not, it should be fairly easy to translate what is now in the archive of PFA 1A into a newer version of PDF. So that would be another way. Okay.
Yeah, there will be always the ISO standard, which was built once, and so you can always recreate a reader if you want to.
Right. There is no expectation the ISO standard would change. It's just going to get updated and it's going to get new versions, but that's not going to eliminate the old versions for future use.
We just learned today that you've got all those test files, the test packages where you can test your reader, and so there shouldn't be a reason to do that in the future as well. If there is a demand for that reader.
Right, and there will be demand because today we have billions of PFA files in the archives. So, and as you have said, it's very well specified, so there is no guessing required in order to build that viewer. Any other questions?
That was
it was the very first track. It was an Olvera VF, and there is a project of the VF Association, and that also created 1,500 test cases, so that for PFA. Any other questions? So maybe one question that I have is, I don't know, are you familiar a little bit with next generation? Do you think that we can expect something, new benefits or features that take advantage of it? So I was thinking about reusability. Is this?
Well, yeah, next gen PDF is actually going to be a well-tagged PDF, as Matt mentioned this morning. So as a well-tagged PDF, actually, PDF documents are going to lend themselves to much higher reusability, so you're going to be able to extract content much more reliably out of those documents and create different content out of it. So for example, if you see a table in a PDF document, you're not really sure that that's a table if it's not a tagged document, and if that document is being processed by a screen reader or it's being processed automatically, those processes won't really know that this is a table unless you have a tagged document. And the new next-gen PDF format is really going to resolve that issue for us. It's going to allow for much higher reusability of documents. So that's a really great feature.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? So I think then, thank you.